It's 5:20 p.m. on October 2nd, 2002, in Aspen Hill, Maryland. Outside, the sunlight is just starting to fade. Inside a Michael's craft store, the sounds and smells are familiar, comforting. The rustle of shopping bags, the quiet chatter of customers, the beep of a scanner at the checkout counter, the smell of cinnamon spice candles. Cashier Ann Chapman is going about her day at work, a scene repeated millions of times a day across America. And then the sound of a normal day is shattered. A bullet tears through the front window, zipping past Anne's head, and buries itself in a shelf behind her. No one is hurt. In the confusion, it's dismissed. A stray shot from the woods, maybe. A freak accident. No serious alarms are raised. It's an anomaly. A strange and unsettling moment that is quickly filed away. But it wasn't an accident. It was a chilling sign of things to come. Just 1 hour later, and a few miles away, in the neighboring community of Wheaton, 55-year-old James Martin is walking across the parking lot of a Shoppers Food Warehouse grocery store. He's a program analyst for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a husband, a father, but also an upstanding member of his community. He volunteers with a local elementary school, judging their science fair and donating computers, all because of a strong desire to inspire the next generation to choose careers in science. That night, however, James was a man simply running an errand on a Wednesday evening. Witnesses heard a single loud bang, a crack that sounded out of place in the suburban quiet. James Martin clutched his chest, crying out for help, and then collapsed to the asphalt. He died almost instantly from a single bullet wound to his back. To the Montgomery County Police, it's a homicide. A tragic, senseless, and deeply puzzling murder. There are no eyewitnesses to the shooting itself. No clear motive. No suspect. It appears a solitary, random act of violence. At this moment, the shattered window at the craft store and the fallen man in the parking lot are treated as two separate, isolated events. No one yet understands. They're the first notes in a symphony of terror. The killers had chosen their stage with chilling precision. Not a dark alley or a deserted street, but the brightly lit, utterly familiar landscapes of normal American life. A craft store, a grocery store parking lot. They were weaponizing the mundane, turning the places we feel safest into their hunting grounds. The goal wasn't just to kill, it was to prove that nowhere was safe, that at any moment, during the most ordinary of tasks, your life could be extinguished by an invisible enemy. As night falls on October 2nd, a community grieves a single, inexplicable murder, unaware that the terror is just getting started. The sun rose on Thursday, October 3rd, on a region that was still oblivious. Over the next 15 hours, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area would be plunged into a state of collective terror, as hidden killers unleashed a storm of violence with terrifying speed and precision. The question from the night before would be answered in the most brutal way imaginable. At 7:40 a.m., James Sonny Buchanan, a 39-year-old landscaper, is mowing the lawn at an auto mall in Rockville, Maryland. Known for his kindness and selflessness, Sonny isn't just a man who mows lawns. He cares for people, often mentoring kids and helping anyone who'd fallen on hard times. But October 3rd is just another day for him, when the unthinkable occurs. A single loud bang echoes across the lot. An employee hears it, but doesn't see anything. A moment later, another employee runs into the auto mall office, shouting that someone is dead in the parking lot. Sonny is found with a massive wound to his chest. He was killed instantly while doing his job. Just 32 minutes later, at 8:12, 54-year-old taxi driver Prem Kumar Walekar, a devoted husband and father, is pumping gas at a mobile station in Aspen Hill. At the next pump over, Dr. Caroline Namro hears a loud bang. She looks up to see Walekar stumbling toward her, pleading, "Call an ambulance," before he collapses. She tries to administer CPR, but it's already too late. 25 minutes pass. At 8:37 a.m., Sarah Ramos, a 34-year-old babysitter and housekeeper, just got off a bus and is enjoying a few precious moments reading on a bench in Norbeck. There's just enough time to read another chapter while she waits for her next ride. Sadly, she never makes it onto the next stage of her journey. A single shot ends her life. An hour and 21 minutes later, at 9:58 a.m., 25-year-old Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, a recent transplant from Boise, Idaho, with a 3-year-old daughter, is just finishing a simple chore. She's vacuuming out a minivan at a Shell station in Kensington. She becomes the fourth murder victim of the morning. In just over 2 hours, 4 people in a few square miles of Montgomery County had been executed. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. One shooter, using a high-powered rifle, was picking off innocent people at random. Fear began to ripple through the community. The killer then went silent for the rest of the day, letting the terror sink in. At 9:20 p.m. in Washington, D.C. itself, 72-year-old Pascal Charlot, a retired carpenter, is shot while taking an evening stroll. Emergency responders arrive quickly, but Pascal only lasts an hour. He's pronounced dead at the hospital. The next day, Friday, October 4th, the killing spree continued. 43-year-old Caroline Sewell was shot and wounded while loading packages into her minivan in Spotsylvania, Virginia. She'd just been making a routine stop at a craft store. It appeared the killer's hunting ground was expanding. Police were scrambling for clues. There were precious few to go on in those early days. In several of the shootings, witnesses reported seeing a vehicle hastily leaving the scene, but the descriptions were inconsistent. Some described it as a white box truck. In fact, right after one Maryland shooting, a witness claimed to have heard a popping sound and then saw a white van speeding away. This lead prompted officers to broadcast alerts for white vans or trucks, and many such vehicles were stopped and searched, to no avail. Other reports, however, mentioned a dark Chevy Caprice sedan seen at least near one shooting site. This detail would later prove critical, but amidst the chaos, it was hard to separate reliable tips from red herrings. Criminal profilers initially assumed the shooter was likely a lone, angry, middle-aged white male, a typical profile for serial killers. But this case defied easy comparison. The victims had no common profile. Men, women, an old retired handyman, a young mother, even a 13-year-old child had been targeted. On October 7th, 1 week into the spree, the sniper struck a child for the first time. At 8 a.m. that day, 7th grader Ian Brown, 13, was just arriving at his middle school in Bowie, Maryland, when he was shot in the chest. Miraculously, he survived. His aunt, a nurse, rushed him to the hospital, and he would later testify in court about that horrifying day. This shooting of a child escalated the fear to a new level. If even kids on school grounds weren't safe, no one felt safe. As one high school student from the area later recalled, "I lost the chance to be a child because that shooting shattered any idea that I was invincible." At the scene of Brown's shooting, investigators found a crucial piece of evidence. A tarot death card, like those used in fortune-telling, had been left near the shell casing. Scrawled on it were the words, "Call me God," in bold letters. On the back of the card, there was a message for police on 3 lines. "For you, Mr. Police. Code, call me God. Do not release to the press." The sniper was taunting law enforcement, daring them to engage. The authorities understood they were dealing with a killer or killers who wanted attention and power over the narrative. They honored the request and initially kept the tarot card secret, but details somehow leaked to the media within a day. Suddenly the public knew the frightening moniker the sniper had given himself. The press reported on the Call Me God card, fueling even more media frenzy about the case. That tarot card was the first direct communication from the sniper. It solved one mystery, confirming these shootings were indeed connected, not coincidental, but it opened another. What did the sniper want? The cryptic message provided no specific demands, only an alias. Investigators wondered if this was about ego, terrorism, or something else entirely. Meanwhile, all they could do was keep chasing any leads and hope for a break. The attacks continued relentlessly. Dean Myers, 53, killed pumping gas in Manassas, Virginia. He was a Vietnam War veteran who had once survived another gunshot wound overseas. In his civilian life, he was a civil engineering project manager, but more importantly, he was a brother and a beloved uncle. Kenneth Bridges, 53, also killed at a gas station in Fredericksburg. Kenneth left behind a family of 7 and a large community of friends and colleagues who he helped support with his company. On October 14th, the case struck the law enforcement community directly when Linda Franklin, a 47-year-old FBI intelligence analyst, was shot and killed in front of her husband as they loaded purchases into their car at a Home Depot in Falls Church, Virginia. The final victim, 35-year-old bus driver Conrad Johnson, was shot in the steps of his bus on October 22nd, just half a mile from where the very first shooting had occurred. For 22 days, millions of people were held hostage with fear. The police were hunting an enemy who could strike from hundreds of yards away and vanish without a trace. They now had a message from a killer who called himself God, but a name wasn't an identity, and a message wasn't a location. How could law enforcement possibly catch a phantom who turned an entire region into his personal shooting range? As the body count rose, the pressure to stop the killings became immense. The investigation grew into one of the largest and most complex manhunts in American history. A massive sniper task force was assembled, headquartered in Montgomery County, eventually involving more than 1,500 investigators from 27 different local and state police departments, 7 federal agencies, even the Department of Defense. The FBI alone assigned some 400 agents to the case. The public face of this monumental effort was Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose. Night after night, he stood before a bank of cameras, a stoic and reassuring presence in the midst of chaos. He adopted a communication strategy of maximum disclosure with minimum delay, trying to balance the public's desperate need for information with the investigation's critical need for secrecy. But behind the scenes, the task force was facing an almost impossible challenge. The randomness of the attacks left investigators with few traditional leads. The victims weren't connected. The locations were scattered across multiple jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, and the killer fired from a distance, leaving behind nothing but a shell casing and a grieving family. The sheer number of agencies involved created its own problems. In 2002, radio systems between different police departments often couldn't communicate with each other. This lack of interoperability was a massive hurdle. To solve it, authorities deployed cutting-edge technology for the time: mobile cell towers called cell on wheels, and multi-frequency radio receivers to bridge the communication gap between agencies. Tip lines were flooded with more than 100,000 calls. The daily press conferences created a strange and dangerous dynamic. While Chief Moose was trying to communicate with the public, he was also, inadvertently, communicating with the killers. The snipers were watching the news. They were following the investigation into their own crimes. And they used the media attention to play a deadly game with law enforcement, leaving taunting notes and making cryptic calls. The public stage of the investigation had become a part of their battlefield. For 2 long weeks, the investigation stalled. The killers seemed unstoppable, always one step ahead. They held all the power, controlling the emotional state of an entire region. But then, on October 17th, feeling invincible, they made their first and most critical mistake. It was an act of pure hubris. A man claiming to be the sniper called a police tip line. He was frustrated his previous attempts to communicate hadn't been taken seriously. To prove he was the real deal, he gave investigators a little investigative tease. He told them to look into an unsolved crime from a month earlier, a robbery homicide at a liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama, where a woman had been killed. It was just the break they needed. The killer's own arrogance had just handed the police the one thing they'd been unable to find: a tangible lead, a physical location, far from the DC area, where the killer could have left a trace of himself behind. It wasn't a piece of brilliant detective work that cracked the case open. It was the perpetrator's own psychological need to be recognized, to boast about his crimes. As investigators scrambled to pull records from a forgotten murder case in Alabama, a new question hit the task force. What happened at that liquor store? And would it finally be enough to put a name and a face to the monster in their midst? The phone call immediately sent investigators racing to the files of the Montgomery, Alabama Police Department. They quickly confirmed the crime the killer referenced. On September 21st, 2002, a robbery at a liquor store had left 52-year-old clerk Claudine Parker dead and her 24-year-old coworker Kelly Adams critically wounded. At the time, it was seen as just another tragic, unsolved local crime. And now it was the key to unlocking the biggest manhunt in the country. Crucially, the Alabama police had recovered evidence from the scene, including ballistic evidence, and most importantly, a fingerprint left on a gun magazine that one of the perpetrators had dropped. An FBI agent from the Mobile office was dispatched to retrieve the evidence and fly it directly to the FBI's state-of-the-art laboratory in Washington, D.C. The print was run through the National Fingerprint Database, and there was a match. The fingerprint belonged to a 17-year-old Jamaican immigrant named Lee Boyd Malvo. His prints were on file with the Immigration and Naturalization Service from a previous arrest in Washington state. After weeks of chasing a phantom, the task force had a name, and it didn't fit the normal criminal profile. But the file contained another critical piece of information. Malvo's arrest record mentioned a close associate, an older man he was known to travel with, John Allen Muhammad. When agents ran the name, an FBI agent in Tacoma, Washington recognized it. The agent recalled a tip that was called in about Muhammad, connecting him to concerning behavior. In a matter of hours, the investigation went from having no suspects to having two. The profiles of the two men began to come into a sharp, terrifying focus. John Allen Muhammad was 41 years old, a veteran of the Gulf War. In the Army, he was trained as a marksman, qualifying as an expert with the M16 rifle, the highest level of marksmanship for a soldier. He was twice divorced, with a history of domestic issues. His second wife, Mildred, had been so afraid of him, she obtained a restraining order. And that restraining order made it a federal crime for Muhammad to possess a firearm, which gave the FBI the immediate legal grounds to issue a federal warrant for his arrest. His accomplice, Lee Boyd Malvo, was a world away from the disciplined middle-aged veteran. He was a lost and vulnerable 17-year-old. Born in Jamaica, he had a transient and difficult childhood, often abandoned by his mother and left to fend for himself. In Antigua, he met John Muhammad, who was there with the children he kidnapped from his ex-wife. To the lonely boy, Muhammad appeared to be a strong, caring figure. He quickly fell under his spell. What formed between them wasn't a partnership of equals, but a toxic cult of two people. Muhammad, the narcissistic manipulator, found in Malvo the perfect, impressionable clay to mold. He became the father figure that Malvo so desperately craved, but he used that position to systematically break him down and rebuild him as a killer. He isolated Malvo from everyone he knew, put him on a strict diet, and subjected him to intense physical training. He indoctrinated the teenager with his own vitriolic brand of Islam and anti-government ideology, teaching him that they were soldiers in a war against America. And using his expert military skills, he trained the boy relentlessly in marksmanship. Malvo would later describe the psychological manipulation in stark terms. Quote, "He understood exactly how to motivate me, by giving approval or denying approval. This fusion of a broken man's rage and a lost boy's vulnerability created a lethality that neither might have possessed on their own." With the two names in hand, the system that had been so helpless for weeks suddenly worked with astonishing speed. Investigators scoured databases connecting the dots. They found that John Allen Muhammad had registered a blue 1990 Chevy Caprice in New Jersey with the license plate NDA21Z. On the morning of October 23rd, Chief Charles Moose stepped in front of the cameras, but this time the message was different. He issued a bolo, a be on the lookout, for John Allen Muhammad, now considered armed and dangerous, and his 17-year-old accomplice, Lee Boyd Malvo. He released the description of their car, the blue Chevy Caprice. The nameless terrorists now had names. They had faces, and the entire country was looking for them. The bolo for John Allen Muhammad, Lee Boyd Malvo, and their blue Chevrolet Caprice electrified the nation. Their faces were on every television screen, their names on every radio broadcast. After 22 days of living in fear of an invisible threat, the public now had a target to look for. For the snipers, the clock was ticking. In the early morning hours of October 24th, the end didn't come from a high-tech surveillance operation or a dramatic police shootout, but from the observation of an ordinary citizen. At a rest stop off Interstate 70 in Myersville, Maryland, a truck driver named Whitney Donahue spotted a car that matched the description from the news, a dark blue Chevy Caprice with New Jersey plates. Another man, trucker Ron Lantz, confirmed the sighting and made a courageous decision. He and another trucker used their tractor trailers to block the exit of the rest stop, ensuring the car couldn't escape. Then they called 911. It was the tip that ended the nightmare. Law enforcement descended on the rest stop in force, swarming the area and setting up a secure perimeter. Inside the Caprice, Muhammad and Malvo were asleep, exhausted, and unaware their reign of terror was over. At 3:19 a.m., a heavily armed team of Maryland State Police, Montgomery County SWAT officers, and the FBI's elite hostage rescue team moved in. They smashed the car's windows and took the sleeping suspects into custody without a single shot being fired. The manhunt was over, but the biggest mystery of the case, the question of how they managed to kill so many people without ever being seen, was about to be solved. And the answer was inside the car. The 1990 Chevy Caprice wasn't just a getaway vehicle, it was a custom-built killing machine. Investigators discovered a small, discreet hole had been cut into the car's trunk, just above the license plate. The back seat had been modified, with the sheet metal between the passenger compartment and the trunk removed. This allowed the shooter, likely Malvo, to crawl from the back seat into the trunk completely undetected. From there, he could lie prone, take aim through the small hole, and fire the rifle without ever leaving the concealment of the car. The car was, as the FBI later described it, a rolling sniper's nest. This ingenious and terrifying modification was the key to their invisibility. While the entire region was on the lookout for a suspicious white van, the killers were hiding in plain sight, inside a nondescript, beat-up old sedan that blended perfectly into the suburban landscape they were terrorizing. The car itself was their primary weapon, a self-contained, mobile, and utterly anonymous platform for murder. Inside the vehicle, police found a ton of evidence that would seal their fate. There was the Bushmaster XM15, the .223 caliber rifle that ballistic tests would link to nearly all of the shootings. They also found a rifle scope, a bipod to study the shots, walkie-talkies, and maps. In this picture, you can see what appears to be a holographic or reflex sight. It doesn't look like an EOTech, but it does look similar. And there was a stolen laptop computer taken from one of the earlier victims, which contained maps of the shooting sites and planned getaway routes. Their capture was a testament to the power of a vigilant public. After weeks of being terrorized, it was an alert citizen, armed with information provided by law enforcement, who made the call that brought the killers to justice. The partnership between the police and the community they served had finally closed the net. With Muhammad and Malvo in custody, the spell of terror over Washington began to break. People could start breathing a little easier. Children could play outside again, and the region slowly returned to normal. Capturing the snipers not only ended the immediate threat, but also unlocked a web of related crimes. Muhammad and Malvo were soon tied to a string of shootings across the country from earlier that year. In fact, between February and September of 2002, the pair already killed 7 people and wounded 7 others, in states ranging from Washington and Arizona to Louisiana and Alabama. Piece by piece, investigators reconstructed the path that led Muhammad and Malvo to Washington, showing that the 23 days of terror were actually the climax of a much longer cross-country crime spree. In February of 2002, 21-year-old Kenya Nicole Cook opened the front door for Aunt's Tacoma, Washington home and was met with a single gunshot. She died instantly. The bullet had been fired by Lee Boyd Malvo, acting under the direction of John Allen Muhammad. Their choice of target wasn't random. Cook's aunt, Isa Nichols, had once encouraged Muhammad's ex-wife, Mildred, to leave him. This was revenge, disguised as random violence, and it marked the pair's first known killing together. A month later, in Tucson, Arizona, Jerry Taylor, a 60-year-old golfer, was struck down by a long-range rifle shot while practicing chip shots on a quiet afternoon. Muhammad's sister lived nearby, and investigators would later learn he was visiting her at the time. The pattern was starting to take shape. Isolated victims, struck without warning, chosen seemingly for convenience rather than any connection. By summer, the pair crossed the country. On August 1st, 2002, in Hammond, Louisiana, Malvo slashed a man's tire in a parking lot and waited. When John Gaeta, 51, bent down to fix it, Malvo shot him in the neck. Miraculously, Gaeta survived by playing dead while Malvo stole his wallet. This encounter showed a chilling escalation. Violence was now being paired with manipulation and theft. It was a deadly rehearsal for what would soon follow. In early September, the shootings reached the Washington, D.C. region. On the night of September 5th, 2002, Paul LaRuffa, a pizzeria owner in Clinton, Maryland, was locking up for the evening when he was shot 6 times at a close range. Against all odds, he lived. Police would later find his stolen laptop in Muhammad's car when the snipers were finally caught. Only days later, the attacks came one after another. On September 14th, Rupinder Benny Oberoi, a 22-year-old employee at a liquor store in Silver Springs, Maryland, was shot in the back outside his workplace, but he survived. The next night, Muhammad Rashid, another liquor store clerk in Brandywine, was wounded while closing up shop. The pace was quickening, one shooting blending into the next. By September 21st, the killings spread south. In Atlanta, Georgia, 41-year-old Millian Waldemariam was gunned down outside a package store just after midnight. 19 hours later, that same rifle cut down Claudine Parker, a 52-year-old store clerk in Montgomery, Alabama, during a robbery that left her coworker, Kelly Adams, critically injured. Investigators wouldn't realize it yet, but the evidence from that scene would later become the crucial link that exposed Muhammad and Melvo as the snipers. 2 days later, on September 23rd, the pair struck again, this time in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, killing Hong Im Ballinger with a single shot to the head from a Bushmaster rifle. Their trail of bodies now stretched from the Pacific Northwest to the Deep South. The shootings were no longer just experiments in violence. They were a calculated warm-up. Each attack refined their method. Each victim was a step closer to the terror that would soon paralyze the nation's capital. With John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo now in custody, the legal battle began. The crimes had spanned multiple jurisdictions, but U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft made a strategic decision. He directed that Muhammad's first and most prominent trial would be held in Virginia. The reasoning was cold and calculated. Virginia had one of the country's most active death penalties, and at the time, it was one of the few states that still allowed for the execution of offenders who were juveniles at the time of their crime, meaning 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo could be given a death sentence. In the courtroom, prosecutors worked to unravel the complex and chilling motives behind the 23 days of terror. Several theories emerged. The first was simple extortion. At the scene of a shooting in Ashland, Virginia, the killers had left a 4-page letter demanding $10 million to stop the violence. This demand became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case in Virginia, allowing them to charge Muhammad under a new anti-terrorism statute. They argued the shootings were an act of terrorism, designed to intimidate the public and extort the government. But many investigators believed the true motive was far more personal and sinister. The prevailing theory was the entire 3-week killing spree was an elaborate and monstrous piece of cover for Muhammad's ultimate goal, to murder his ex-wife Mildred. He had terrorized her for years, and she lived in the D.C. area with their 3 children, who he desperately wanted to regain custody of. In fact, Paula Ruffa's restaurant was just a few blocks from her home, indicating Muhammad had been in her area regardless of the restraining order. The plan, investigators believed, was to kill her and make it look like just another random act by the mysterious sniper, ensuring the police wouldn't suspect an estranged ex-husband. While a judge ultimately prevented prosecutors from presenting this theory at trial for a lack of a direct link, Mildred Muhammad herself has stated she believes she was the final target. Another motive, revealed through Malvo's testimony, was even more chilling and grandiose. In 2006, Malvo described Muhammad's broader mission in detail. According to Malvo, the ultimate goal was to extort money from the government and use it to establish a camp where they would train children as terrorists to spread chaos in cities across America. Muhammad envisioned bringing the country to its knees. He allegedly talked of plans to shut things down in major cities. Despite early speculation, the attacks didn't appear to be part of an organized international terror plot. Given that the shootings came so soon after 9/11, many people feared a terrorist connection, but investigators found no evidence of any foreign or ideological involvement. Malvo had even scribbled erratic notes about jihad and sketches of Osama bin Laden while in jail, but authorities dismissed these as the delusions of an angry teen, not directives from any group. Muhammad and Malvo's war was essentially a personal one, a homegrown terror driven by their own grievances. Part of their twisted plan involved killing 6 people a day for 30 days, and specifically targeting certain groups to inflame hatred. Whether those plans were ever truly feasible or just a hateful fantasy, it's possible Muhammad saw the sniper spree as only phase 1 of a larger terror campaign. In the end, whatever their initial motives, Muhammad and Malvo also seemed to enjoy the power they wielded during those 23 days. The power to invoke fear, to make authorities jump through hoops, to grab headlines as the self-proclaimed God who decides who lives and dies. Anyone could be a target. A woman reading on a bench, a man mowing a lawn, a child walking into school. That randomness was the point. It ensured everyone felt vulnerable. While Muhammad's trial focused on his role as the mastermind, Malvo's defense presented a different, more complex picture. His lawyers argued he wasn't fully culpable for his actions, employing an insanity defense built on the concept of indoctrination. They argued that Muhammad had effectively brainwashed the vulnerable teenager, causing Malvo to lose the ability to distinguish right from wrong. They painted the portrait of a boy who, after a lifetime of abuse and abandonment, was so desperate for a father figure, he became a willing tool for an evil man. In the end, the juries weren't swayed enough to acquit. John Allen Muhammad was convicted of capital murder and terrorism. On November 10th, 2009, he was executed by lethal injection in Virginia. Family members of the victims came from all over the country to stand witness to his death. Lee Boyd Malvo was also convicted of murder. He was spared a death sentence by a landmark 2005 Supreme Court ruling that declared capital punishment for juvenile offenders unconstitutional. He was sentenced to multiple terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even the prosecutor, at one of his sentencing hearings, acknowledged that Malvo had been under the sway of an evil man and had shown growth and remorse since his capture. The Beltway Sniper case left an indelible scar on the nation. It forced an expansion of a legal understanding of domestic terrorism. Coming just a year after the 9/11 attacks, the case demonstrated that terrorism wasn't always driven by global politics or religious fanaticism. It could be born from personal grievance, greed, and a desire to terrorize a population for one's own twisted ends. The case also remains a haunting case study in culpability. The starkly different fates of the 41-year-old mastermind and the 17-year-old triggerman force a difficult conversation about influence, responsibility, and how the justice system treats young offenders who are molded by predatory adults. For 3 weeks in October of 2002, the simple everyday rhythms of American life were shattered. The victims: James Martin, James Buchanan, Premkumar Walekar, Sarah Ramos, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, Pascal Charlot, Dean Myers, Kenneth Bridges, Linda Franklin, and Conrad Johnson were killed while mowing lawns, pumping gas, shopping, and reading books. 3 others, Caroline Sewell, Ian Brown, and Jeffrey Hopper, were wounded but survived to carry the physical and emotional scars. In the end, the story of the Beltway Snipers is a chilling reminder of how fragile the veneer of safety can be, and how the deadliest of storms can be born from the dark and tragic fusion of a broken man's rage and a lost boy's search for a father. If you believe we've earned it, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this content with your friends. If you're watching on TV, just press up or down to open the video menu. Just navigate over to our channel icon, press OK, and you should see a subscribe button. As a small channel, viewers like you truly make a massive difference. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.